Court laughed at a 9-year-old black boy until he used his legal genius to protect his mom. Before we start today's story, comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what's next. Get this kid out of my courtroom now, Judge Rowland shouted, his voice echoing through the room. His gavel hit the desk so hard that it sounded like thunder. He pointed it at 9-year-old Eli Carter as if it were a weapon. The whole courtroom was full of people, and suddenly they started to laugh. "Look at this little boy pretending to be a lawyer," a woman said, smirking. "Absolutely pathetic," another person whispered. The bailiff, a tall man in a dark uniform, stomped toward Eli. His heavy boots made loud thud, thud, thud sounds on the wooden floor. "Move it, kid," he growled. "You're embarrassing yourself." Eli's mother, Grace Carter, jumped up from her seat. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Please," she cried. "He's just trying to help." "Silence," Judge Rowland roared. "I will not allow this circus in my courtroom. Remove this child before I charge you both with contempt." The people in the gallery laughed louder. Some pulled out their phones to record. One man started clapping slowly, mocking the small boy in his oversized suit. But Eli didn't move. He stood tall and still, his small hands trembling only slightly. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "Your Honor, I invoke Federal Rule 17. The laughter stopped instantly. The room went silent. The judge's face turned pale. The lawyers froze. Because what happened next didn't just surprise everyone in that courtroom. It uncovered a secret that reached some of the most powerful people in Montgomery County. To understand how a 9-year-old boy ended up standing in front of a corrupt judge and powerful men, we need to go back 3 weeks earlier. The Riverside apartments were old and falling apart. The paint on the walls was cracked and peeling, hanging down like dry skin. Black mold grew in dark corners, making it hard to breathe. The heaters hadn't worked for 6 months. In the cold winter nights, families had to sleep under blankets, huddled together just to stay warm. The water that came from the pipes was brown and smelled terrible. Everything it touched turned rusty or stained. Inside apartment 4B, Eli sat cross-legged on the floor. Around him were tall stacks of law books, some so tall they almost touched the ceiling. Eli was only 9 years old, but he had read more of those books than most first-year law students. The books weren't even his. He had found them in a dumpster behind the county law library 3 years ago. The library had thrown them away when it got new ones, and Eli had rescued them. While other kids his age collected Pokemon cards or toys, Eli collected knowledge. He had taught himself to read when he was only 3. Since then, he read everything he could find. Books about medicine, history, math, and the law. "Eli, baby, come eat dinner," his mom, Grace, called from their tiny kitchen. But Eli didn't hear her. He was too busy studying a case about tenant rights. He traced each line with his finger under the dim light of their only working lamp. A small chess set sat beside him. He liked to play chess with himself whenever he needed to think about hard problems. The walls around him were covered with paper. He had written legal notes all over them in his neat handwriting. Grace worked 3 jobs just to keep them alive. She cleaned offices early in the morning, stocked shelves at a grocery store during the day, and delivered food for a restaurant late at night. She was only 28 years old, but her face showed tiredness from years of hard work. Still, she never complained. Everything she did was for Eli. Grace had grown up in foster care, moving from home to home until she turned 18. She had nothing but determination, and her love for her smart, sweet boy. She had known Eli was special from the time he was tiny. When he was 5, he corrected adults' grammar and solved math problems meant for high schoolers. Their landlord was a rich man named Conrad Vale. He owned more than 200 apartments across the city. He made money by keeping them in bad condition, then blaming families for the damage. He drove a new fancy car every day and lived in a mansion bigger than any house Grace had ever seen. Vale never fixed anything. When pipes burst, he blamed the tenants. When walls cracked, he said people had broken them. When mold grew, he accused families of being dirty. Then he sued them for thousands of dollars that poor families could never pay. Families like Grace and Eli didn't have lawyers or money, so they usually gave up and moved out. Judge Harold Rowland had worked in the Montgomery County Housing Court for 30 years. In all that time, he had never once ruled against a landlord. Not once. Lawyers had a nickname for his cases, Rowland Specials. They always meant the same thing: landlords win, tenants lose. What nobody knew was that Judge Rowland was friends with Conrad Vale. They both belonged to the same fancy country club, where membership cost more than most families made in a year. Someone had been secretly paying the judge's membership fees. The money came from the Montgomery County Landlords Association, the same group that Vale led. They played golf together twice a week and went to the same rich people parties where they complained about lazy tenants who wanted things like heat and clean water. But Vale had never met anyone like Eli Carter. 3 weeks earlier, Grace had done everything right. When the heater broke and the mold spread, she took pictures. She wrote reports and sent them to the city's health department. She thought the system would protect her. Instead, a few days later, she got an eviction notice. The letter said she owed $50,000 in damages to the apartment. It came with pictures of water damage, cracked walls, and mold. But Grace knew those problems had been there long before she and Eli moved in. "They're saying we destroyed the apartment, Eli," she said softly, showing him the papers. Eli looked up from his law book, frowning. "Mama, do you still have the photos you took when we first moved in?" "Yes, baby," she said. "But what good will they do? We can't afford a lawyer. No one will believe us." Eli's eyes sparkled with determination. "We don't need to hire a lawyer, Mama," he said. "We just need to become one." That night, while Grace slept, Eli stayed awake. He studied property law, tenant rights, and court rules. He read until his eyes burned. He discovered something special buried deep in a law book, something called next friend representation. It meant that in special cases, someone, even a child, could help represent another person in court. He didn't know it yet, but that rule would change everything. The next morning, there was a loud knock on their door. A man in a suit handed Grace more papers. "You've been served," he said, and left. Grace read the papers with shaking hands. "They're suing us for $50,000, she whispered. $50,000. Eli sat beside her and read every line carefully. The legal words were confusing, but he understood them. "Mama, look," he said, spreading out the papers and the old photos she took when they moved in. "See this brown stain on the bathroom wall? It was there before. You have proof." Grace sighed. "Baby, it doesn't matter. They have lawyers. They have the judge. What do we have?" Over the next week, things only got worse. Grace called every free legal aid office in the city, but they were full or closed. She tried to borrow money, but everyone she knew was struggling too. She stopped eating properly, drinking coffee to stay awake for her 3 jobs. She looked thinner and sadder every day. One night, she came home holding a letter. Her eyes were red from crying. "Baby, maybe we should just take their offer," she said softly. "If we move out right away, they said they won't chase us for the $50,000. Eli shook his head firmly. "If you sign that, Mama, it means you're guilty. It'll destroy your credit. You'll never be able to rent again or get a car loan." Grace looked down. "But if we fight and lose, they'll take everything," she said. "They could take my paychecks forever." That's when Eli made a decision. He went to the public library every day after school. He used the computers to research Judge Rowland's cases. He made charts and lists, tracking every judgment the judge had made in 5 years. He discovered something shocking. Out of 847 cases, the judge had ruled in favor of landlords 832 times. That was a 98.3% win rate. Something almost impossible unless something was wrong. Eli dug deeper. He found public documents about the country club memberships and payment records. The same group that paid the judge's fees was led by Conrad Vale. That's when Eli understood the truth. This wasn't just one greedy man or one unfair judge. It was a whole system built to make poor families lose and rich landlords win. And if they lost, his mom would lose everything. Her wages, her credit, their home, and maybe even Eli himself. Because social services had already called twice. If they got evicted and had nowhere to go, the government might take Eli away and put him in foster care. Grace had been in that system. She knew what it did to kids. The thought of her son going through that was worse than any lawsuit. Meanwhile, Vale started trying to scare Grace. He showed up at her jobs, whispering to her bosses about her legal problems. Within a week, she lost one of her jobs. "I'll make sure you never rent anywhere in this city again," Vale told her one night. "I know every landlord, every property manager, every housing officer. Cross me and you'll be living in your car." But while Vale used fear and money, Eli used something stronger, his mind. Night after night, he kept studying. He found proof that Vale's apartments all had the same problems. Leaky pipes, mold, broken heaters, and that people had complained for years but nothing was done. Then, deep in a book of federal housing laws, Eli found something powerful. The implied warranty of habitability. It was a law that said landlords must keep homes safe and livable. If they didn't, tenants didn't have to pay rent, and could even sue the landlord for damages. Eli smiled. For the first time, the system that had always worked against people like his mom might finally help them. He was ready to fight back. And soon, the whole city would know his name. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when Grace walked quietly into the small living room. The light from a desk lamp was still on. She saw her 9-year-old son, Eli, sitting at the table surrounded by big, heavy law books. Pieces of paper with notes covered the floor. His little hands held a pen, and his eyes were red from reading for too long. "Eli, baby," Grace whispered, her voice soft but tired. "You need to sleep. You're just a little boy. This isn't your fight." Eli looked up at her slowly. For a moment, Grace didn't see her child. She saw something else, a grown man with a strong heart, smart eyes, and unshakable courage. "Mama," Eli said quietly, "when they come for your family, it becomes everybody's fight. And I think I found a way to win." Grace didn't know what to say. Her little boy sounded so sure, so brave. But inside, she was scared. A few days later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang at Grace's job. Her manager ran to the break room and found her lying on the floor. Grace had fainted. She had been working too hard, eating too little, and not sleeping at all. Around her were cleaning supplies and the same legal papers she had been studying during her short breaks. When Eli got to the hospital, he sat quietly in the waiting room. His small legs dangled off the plastic chair, not touching the floor. Through the window, he could see his mom sleeping in the hospital bed. Machines beeped softly beside her. The doctor came and sat next to Eli. "Your mother is very tired," he said gently. "She's suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. That means her body has no more energy. She needs rest, good food, and a lot less stress." He smiled kindly. "Can someone at home help her with her work?" Eli nodded slowly. He didn't tell the doctor what he was really thinking. His mother would never be able to rest, not until this fight was over. And there was only one way to end it. They had to win. That night, sitting beside his mother's hospital bed, Eli made a choice that would change both their lives forever. He couldn't let the system destroy her. If the adults wouldn't fight for justice, then he would. The next morning, the sky was still pink when Eli put on his big brown suit. It was too large for him, but he straightened the sleeves proudly. He picked up his old briefcase, filled with papers he had studied over the past few nights, and walked out the door. He went to the Montgomery County Clerk's office. The building was quiet because the morning rush hadn't started yet. Computers clicked softly. The lights above buzzed like lazy bees. Behind the front counter sat Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman with gray hair who had worked there for 23 years. She had seen every kind of legal filing, but she had never seen a child walk in with a briefcase. "Can I help you, honey?" she asked with a smile. "Are you looking for your parents?" Eli stood up straight and spoke clearly. "No, ma'am. I'm here to file a pro-se motion for next friend representation in the case of Carter versus Vale Properties." Mrs. Patterson blinked. She thought maybe she heard him wrong. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Eli opened his briefcase and carefully placed a stack of papers on the counter. I'm filing to represent my mother, Grace Carter, as her next friend under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 17. All the paperwork is complete, including the emergency affidavit and supporting documents. Mrs. Patterson looked from the papers to the boy, then back again. She had never seen anything like this in all her years working there. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I don't think children can file legal papers. You need your parents to." "With respect, ma'am," Eli said politely but firmly, "can you please show me the rule or law that says a child can't act as next friend in an emergency?" Mrs. Patterson froze. She didn't know. She had no idea if there was a rule like that. Eli continued, his small voice strong. Rule 17C says that a person who can't represent themselves may be represented by a next friend. My mother is in the hospital because of this case. That means she can't represent herself right now. I am her son and the person most affected. I qualify as my next friend under emergency circumstances. The whole office had gone quiet. Other workers stopped typing and stared at the boy who spoke like a lawyer. I need to check with my supervisor," Mrs. Patterson stammered. "That's perfectly fine," Eli said calmly. "But I should note that if you refuse to accept a properly filed motion based only on my age, without a legal reason, that could be discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. This child was quoting constitutional law. She could barely believe it. After 20 minutes of hushed calls and hurried whispers with the county legal team, Mrs. Patterson returned. Her hands were shaking slightly as she stamped Eli's papers. "Your motion has been accepted," she said finally. "The court date is next Friday at 9 o'clock in Judge Crenshaw's courtroom." Eli's face broke into a smile. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your professionalism in this unusual situation." As he walked out, the entire office stared in awe. By the next day, everyone at the courthouse had heard about the little boy lawyer. And soon, other tenants from Vale's apartments began reaching out. Mrs. Alvarez from apartment 2A brought pictures of broken stairs that had never been fixed. Mr. Daniels from building C brought papers showing he had begged for heat for months. Slowly, Eli collected stories, pictures, and documents from families who had all suffered because of Vale's neglect. He filled folder after folder with evidence. When the landlord, Mr. Conrad Vale, heard about this, he was furious. He hired the best law firm in the city, Morrison, Langston and Associates. Their lawyers were famous for winning everything. The main attorney, Victor Langston, charged $800 an hour and had never lost a housing case. People said he could destroy an opponent in minutes. Langston filed a motion to dismiss Eli's case, saying allowing a child to practice law would make the court a joke. But Eli was ready. He had studied every rule and every case he could find. He spent hours reading in the law library instead of playing outside. Grace worried as she watched her son trade toys for legal papers. "Eli, baby," she said one night, "I'm scared about what this is doing to you. You're only 9 years old. You should be thinking about baseball and video games, not courtrooms and legal strategy." Eli looked up, his face serious. "Mama, I've been reading law since I was 6. Most kids can't read like I can. I understand these rules and what they mean. This isn't just happening to me, it's what I was born for." Grace didn't know whether to cry or smile. Her son was too young for this, but also too brave to stop. News about the little lawyer spread quickly. The local newspaper wrote about him, and soon people from all over the county were talking about Eli Carter. Neighbors who had never spoken before began meeting in the hallways. They shared their stories and their pain. They started calling themselves the Carter tenants. But Eli knew that attention wasn't enough. He needed proof that no one could ignore. Late one night, in the empty law library, Eli made a discovery that changed everything. The night guard, who liked the boy, let him stay after hours. Eli was reading through property inspection reports when his eyes stopped on a page that made his heart race. It was an official city inspection report of their building, dated 3 months before his family had moved in. The report listed all the same problems Vale blamed on his mom: water damage, cracks, mold, broken heat. Eli whispered he knew. He knew about everything. That meant the landlord had lied. Vale had known the building was damaged before they ever moved in. Eli began pulling other reports, matching dates and details. Soon, he covered several tables with papers and charts. A horrible pattern appeared. Vale had done this to hundreds of families. He would buy old, broken buildings. He would secretly record how bad they were, then hide the reports. When new tenants moved in and complained, he sued them, claiming they had caused the damage. Families would get scared and leave. Vale would then collect insurance money for tenant damage and rent the apartments again to new victims. It was a cruel cycle, a machine built to steal from the poor. But Eli wasn't done. While studying financial papers, he found something even worse. His hands shook as he read. Judge Crenshaw, the same judge assigned to their case, owned stock in Vale's company. Judges weren't allowed to have financial interests in cases they ruled on. It was against the rules of fairness. That meant the judge had a reason to always rule in favor of Vale, because when Vale won, the judge made money. Eli stared at the papers. This wasn't just unfair. It was a crime. He felt scared, but he also knew this was the truth he needed. If he brought this out, he could take down both Vale and the corrupt judge. He carefully photographed every document and saved copies in his bag. He memorized every word. "This isn't just about us anymore," he whispered. "It's about everyone they hurt." As the first light of morning came through the library windows, Eli packed his briefcase and walked home. Inside that old case, he carried the truth that could destroy a system built on lies. The day of the trial came. The courthouse was surrounded by news vans. Reporters were setting up cameras. Everyone wanted to see the boy who had dared to take on the landlords and lawyers. Inside courtroom 3B, every seat was taken. People were standing along the walls. On one side of the room sat Conrad Vale, looking calm and confident, with 5 fancy lawyers beside him in dark suits. On the other side sat Eli Carter, just 9 years old, wearing an oversized suit from the thrift store. His old briefcase sat on the table beside him. His mother held his hand tightly, her eyes tired but filled with pride. The room buzzed with whispers. Reporters wrote notes. Cameras clicked softly. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Eli took a deep breath, straightened his papers, and whispered to his mom, "Tomorrow we show them what justice really looks like." And for the first time in a long while, Grace smiled. Because she believed him. Because even though he was only a boy, Eli was ready to fight the system and win. Judge Rowland walked into the courtroom with big, heavy steps. His black robe flowed around him like a curtain as he looked over the full room. People filled every seat. Reporters with cameras were standing near the back. The judge frowned when he saw them. He didn't like being watched. Then his sharp eyes stopped on Eli, the small boy sitting at the table next to his mother. Judge Rowland's face showed clear anger. "This is very strange," he said loudly. "Children do not act as lawyers in my courtroom. This show ends right now." Before anyone else could speak, a tall man in a fancy gray suit stood up. His name was Mr. Victor Langston, the main lawyer for the rich landlord, Mr. Conrad Vale. Mr. Langston smiled in a cold way and spoke smoothly. "Your Honor, we ask the court to end this case immediately. Allowing a child to pretend to be a lawyer makes fun of the law. This is a real courtroom, not a school play." People in the courtroom began whispering and laughing quietly. Someone at the back even called out, "Send the kid home with his toys." But Eli stood up slowly. He was small, only 9 years old, but when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "Your Honor," he said, "I am here as next friend under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 17C. My right to stand here has already been checked and approved by the clerk's office." The whole room went silent. Judge Rowland blinked in surprise. He did not expect a little boy to quote real law rules like that. Mr. Langston laughed in a mocking way. "Your Honor, we're just letting this child play make-believe. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He has no law degree, no training, no idea how complicated property law is." Eli opened his small briefcase calmly. "Mr. Langston," he said politely, Are you familiar with the case Hayes versus Montgomery County? If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and share your favorite part in the comments below. And don't forget to drop a heart to show your support. The Fourth Circuit Court said that a next friend only needs to be competent and honest, not a professional lawyer. Mr. Langston's smile disappeared. He had no idea what that case was. Eli spoke with such confidence that everyone believed him. Eli looked at the judge again. Also, Your Honor, I ask that all evidence today be given under oath. That means everyone must promise to tell the truth, and if they lie, they can be punished for perjury. That one sentence made Mr. Vale's team look nervous. If everything was under oath, they could not twist their stories later. Judge Rowland frowned. He didn't like this boy, but he could tell Eli knew what he was doing. Very well, the judge said. We will continue. But young man, my courtroom has no patience for games or drama. Eli nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Truth doesn't need games. Only accuracy. Mr. Langston began his opening statement. He pointed at Grace Carter, Eli's mother, and said loudly, Your Honor, this woman is a terrible tenant. She damaged Mr. Vale's property through carelessness and vandalism. He held up pictures showing broken walls, mold, and water damage. These photos prove the apartment was destroyed by Mrs. Carter and her son. The damage adds up to $50,000. When Mr. Langston finished, he looked proud. The crowd murmured in agreement. Then Eli stood up again. The noise faded. Every eye turned toward him. Your Honor, Eli began softly, Mr. Langston's story is missing something important, the truth about time and cause. He opened his briefcase again and took out several photos. These pictures were taken by my mother the day we moved into the apartment 2 years ago. He carried the photos carefully to the front table. You can see that all the damage Mr. Langston showed was already there before we moved in. The same water stains, the same cracks, the same mold. People in the courtroom gasped. Eli's pictures had timestamps showing they were from 2 years earlier. Eli continued, We reported these problems to the city during our first week in the apartment. We have copies of every repair request we sent. Mr. Vale's company never fixed anything. Mr. Langston jumped up. Objection. This boy is being coached by someone. Number 9-year-old could. Mr. Langston, the judge said sharply, the boy is showing proof. Your objection is noted but overruled. Eli stood straighter. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Vale is blaming us for damage that was his job to fix. That breaks the law called the implied warranty of habitability, which means landlords must keep homes safe and livable. Everyone stared at Eli in amazement. He was using real legal terms correctly. Even grown lawyers didn't always speak that clearly. Mr. Vale leaned close to his lawyers, whispering angrily. Things were falling apart. The case that was supposed to be easy was turning into a disaster. Mr. Langston tried again. Your Honor, even if some problems existed before, the family made them worse by not caring for the property. Eli smiled calmly. That's an excellent question about the cause, Mr. Langston, he said. That's why I have more evidence that will make the timeline clear. He looked right at the judge. But before I show that, I must talk about something very serious, a possible conflict of interest that could affect this court's fairness. I request a short break to collect documents related to judicial ethics and financial disclosure. The room went silent again. Lawyers in the audience looked shocked. Eli wasn't just fighting the landlord, he was questioning the honesty of the judge himself. Judge Rowland's face turned pale. Mr. Vale looked terrified. They both knew what Eli was hinting at. Recess granted, the judge said quietly. We will continue in 30 minutes. The crowd began buzzing as everyone stood up. Reporters ran to phones and cameras. Eli calmly put his papers back into his briefcase. He had won the first round. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was full of noise. Reporters surrounded anyone who would talk. Microphones pointed everywhere. Online, videos of the morning's hearing were spreading fast. Clips of Eli's speeches were being shared on social media. The hashtag #LittleLawyer, was trending across the country. People were amazed by the brave child who stood up to rich, powerful men. Inside the courthouse, Mr. Vale pulled Judge Roland aside near a side door. "What does that kid know?" he hissed, his voice full of fear. "Quiet," the judge said quickly. "Not here, not now." Meanwhile, in the hallway, other tenants from Mr. Vale's buildings had gathered. Mrs. Alvarez held photos of dangerous stairs that had never been fixed. Mr. Daniels carried letters about broken heaters. "That man ruined my life," Mrs. Alvarez told a reporter. "When I complained about mold, he sued me for $15,000. More people came forward, telling stories of how Mr. Vale had ignored repairs and bullied poor families. Eli's courage had inspired them to speak up. In a quiet bathroom nearby, Eli and his mom finally had a moment alone. Grace's hands were shaking. "Baby, I'm scared," she said. "These people are powerful. They could hurt us." Eli held her hands tightly. "Mama, I found something huge," he whispered. "Judge Roland owns stock in Mr. Vale's company. He has money tied to Vale. That means this whole case was unfair from the start." Grace's eyes widened. "If you're right, this could destroy both of them," she said softly. "But it could also put us in danger." Eli nodded. "I know. But if we don't fight, other families will keep suffering. Sometimes doing what's right means taking risks." Grace looked at her son. He wasn't just her little boy anymore. He was brave, smart, and determined to make things better. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Trust me," Eli said. "When we go back in, I'll show everything. It's going to get ugly, but we're doing this for everyone who's been hurt." Grace smiled weakly and brushed his hair from his face. "I trust you, baby." When the recess ended, Eli put on his too-big jacket. His briefcase was full of documents that could change everything. As they walked back to the courtroom, people watched them with respect and hope. "Ready, baby?" Grace whispered. "Ready, Mama," Eli said, lifting his chin. "Let's go change the world." The courtroom was silent again as everyone returned. The air felt thick with tension. Reporters sat ready with notebooks. Cameras were pointed at the front. Judge Roland looked pale and nervous. Mr. Vale sat stiffly beside his lawyers, his forehead shiny with sweat. Eli stood at the defendant's table, looking small but fearless. He held the folder in his hands like a sword of truth. "Your Honor," Eli began clearly, "before we continue with the case about property damage, I must formally ask that you remove yourself from this trial because of hidden financial connections." The crowd gasped loudly. Reporters leaned forward, typing furiously. Mr. Langston jumped up. "Objection. This is nonsense." "Mr. Langston," Judge Roland said weakly, "the boy has the floor. Sit down." Eli continued in a calm, serious tone. "Your Honor, public records show that you own 500 shares of Vale Properties Incorporated. You bought them in 2019. You also belong to Pinehurst Country Club, where your yearly membership fee of $12,000 is paid by the Montgomery County Landlords Association, the same group led by Mr. Conrad Vale." People in the courtroom gasped again. Some covered their mouths. The lawyers at Mr. Vale's table looked frozen in shock. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards. Eli didn't stop. "The rules for judges say you must always tell the truth about any money or relationships that could affect your decisions. You didn't tell anyone about these things. That breaks Canon 3 of the Judicial Code of Conduct." Judge Roland's face had gone from white to gray. "Young man, these are serious accusations," he said in a trembling voice. Eli looked him in the eye. "They're not accusations, Your Honor. They're facts." He walked up to the bench and handed the judge a thick folder. "Here are copies of your stock records, your country club papers, and payment receipts from the landlord group. All of these were found through public records requests." The judge's hand shook as he took the folder. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Everyone in that room, lawyers, reporters, and regular citizens, knew what had just happened. A 9-year-old boy, armed only with truth and courage, had stood up to some of the most powerful people in the city. Grace looked at her son with tears in her eyes. He had done something unbelievable. Even Judge Rowland seemed to understand that the game was over. His voice was weak when he finally spoke. The court will recess again while I review these documents. Reporters ran out of the room to break the story. Cameras flashed. People in the gallery began clapping quietly until the whole room filled with applause. Eli didn't smile. He just packed his papers carefully and looked at his mother. "We're not done yet, Mama," he said softly. "But they can't hide anymore." Grace hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you." And as they walked out of that courtroom together, hand in hand, everyone watching knew the truth. A little boy had just changed everything. Not with power, not with money, but with honesty, bravery, and a heart that refused to be silent. A new judge, the Honorable Eleanor Hayes, was called to the courtroom as an emergency replacement. Judge Hayes was known all over the county as a fair and honest woman. People said she could never be bribed. She always wanted to know the truth, and she never let bad people get away with lying. "This court will now continue under new leadership," Judge Hayes said in a strong, clear voice. "Mr. Carter, you may continue with your evidence." What happened next was something no one would ever forget. It was like watching a movie about justice and bravery. Eli, the young boy who had studied hard in the library, began to destroy every lie in Mr. Vale's case. Slowly and carefully, he showed the truth. "Mr. Vale," Eli said politely as the landlord sat on the witness stand, "you said that my mother caused $50,000 in damage to your apartment. Is that what you are saying under oath?" "Yes, absolutely," Vale replied, trying to look confident, but his face showed fear. "Then can you explain this?" Eli asked, holding up some papers. "These are your own inspection reports from 3 months before my family moved in. They show the same cracks, the same water stains, and the same mold that you are blaming us for. Can you explain that?" The papers were like a thunderbolt in the quiet courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Everyone could see the truth. The problems in the apartment were there long before Eli's family moved in. Vale's face turned red. "Those reports, well, that's not really relevant." "Mr. Vale," Judge Hayes interrupted, "you are under oath. Please answer the question. Are these your reports, signed by your property manager?" "Yes," Vale said in a small voice. "So," Eli said calmly, "you rented an unsafe apartment to my family, and now you are suing us for problems you already knew about?" Vale looked trapped. If he told the truth, he would admit to cheating. If he lied, he would be guilty of perjury, lying in court. He could not escape. But Eli wasn't done. He had even more proof. He showed pages and pages of other cases, other families who had been treated the same way. "These," Eli said, "are insurance claims that match problems that already existed before the tenants moved in. These are lawsuits against families who didn't break anything. It's all part of a plan to steal money from poor people." The courtroom was silent. Even the air felt heavy. "Your Honor," Eli said, his voice full of courage, "this isn't just about one apartment or one family. This is about a man who has been cheating hundreds of working families for years. He has used the court system to make his lies look real." Mr. Vale began to shake. His expensive suit couldn't hide how scared he was. His lawyers sat in silence. "Mr. Vale," Eli asked, "how many families have you sued with this same fake plan?" I take the Fifth Amendment," Vale stammered. He didn't want to answer because telling the truth would prove he was a criminal. The whole courtroom gasped. Everyone looked at him with shock. The most powerful man in the county was refusing to speak because a 9-year-old boy had beaten him. Eli turned to face the people sitting in the gallery. Many of them were other tenants who had suffered under Vale's control. "Your Honor," Eli said, "this case shows a pattern of fraud that hurt hundreds of families. I ask this court to order a full investigation into Mr. Vale's business and send everything to the district attorney for criminal charges." Judge Hayes looked at the thick stack of papers. Then she looked at Eli, the small boy who had done what whole government departments had failed to do. "Motion granted," she said firmly. "This court finds clear evidence of fraud and corruption. Mr. Vale, You and your company may not file any new eviction cases until this investigation is complete." The room erupted with cheers and clapping. Families who had been hurt for years were finally seeing justice. Eli had done what grown-ups in power couldn't. He had stopped a machine that had been destroying lives. But Eli wasn't finished yet. He had saved the best moment for last. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I have one final piece of evidence." The room went completely quiet again. You could hear people breathing. "My mama taught me that right is right and wrong is wrong," Eli said. "No matter how much money or power someone has." He looked directly at Conrad Vale. "Mr. Vale," he said, "you picked the wrong family to steal from." Judge Hayes raised her gavel, and the courtroom held its breath. After a long pause, she spoke. "After reviewing the overwhelming evidence presented by young Mr. Carter," she said, "this court finds in favor of the defendants on all counts." The room exploded in joy. People clapped, shouted, and hugged each other. Families who had suffered for years cried tears of happiness. It was like a wave of hope rolling through the courtroom. Furthermore, Judge Hayes continued, "This court awards Grace Carter $500,000 for fraud, emotional distress, and unsafe living conditions." Grace gasped and covered her face with her hands. She began to cry tears of relief. That money would change their lives forever. They could finally buy a safe home and start fresh. "And one more thing," Judge Hayes added, "all of Mr. Vale's properties will be investigated. All pending eviction cases are stopped until every claim is reviewed for fraud." Vale sat frozen. His empire was falling apart. The man who had controlled hundreds of lives now faced ruin. Then Judge Hayes turned to him. "Mr. Vale," she said, "you will publicly apologize to Mrs. Carter and her son for the fraud you committed." His lawyers whispered to him, but she shook her head. "This order is final." Vale slowly stood up, his face red with shame. "I apologize to Mrs. Carter and her son for my actions," he mumbled. "Louder," Judge Hayes commanded, "so everyone can hear." He swallowed hard. "I apologize to Grace Carter and Eli Carter for suing them for damages I knew they did not cause." The moment was electric. Everyone could feel it. One of the richest men in the county was now standing before a mother and her little boy, forced to admit that he had lied and cheated. Eli stood tall, calm, and strong. "Thank you, Mr. Vale," he said kindly. "I hope you've learned to treat people with respect." Even Mr. Vale's lawyer, Victor Langston, walked up to Eli afterward. "Young man," he said, "in 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen anyone handle a case this well. You outsmarted my whole team." Later, the Bar Association gave Eli an honorary award, making him the youngest person in history to receive it. But the real victory wasn't the award or the money. It was what happened next. The people in the gallery began to find their courage. Mrs. Alvarez decided to file a case about the mold that made her daughter sick. Mr. Daniels started a tenants group to fix broken heaters and bad conditions. Mrs. Porter contacted the district attorney about her medical bills from unsafe apartments. Eli's bravery was spreading through the county like light shining through dark clouds. When the courtroom finally emptied, Eli and his mother were surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed. News people asked questions. National TV stations called it the trial of the century. Professors and lawyers across the country started studying Eli's clever strategy. But the most special moment came when everyone was gone, and only Eli and his mom were left in the quiet courtroom. "Baby, I'm so proud of you," Grace whispered, hugging him tightly. "You saved our family, and you saved so many others." Eli looked up, his eyes full of happy tears. "We did it together, Mama. You taught me that right is right and wrong is wrong. Everything I did came from what you taught me." Through the big courtroom windows, they could see families gathering outside. They were holding signs that said, "Thank you, Eli." Children who had been separated by unfair evictions were now reunited. Elderly people who had been thrown out of their homes smiled with hope. That evening, Harvard Law School called Grace's phone. They wanted to offer Eli a full scholarship when he grew up. Other schools called too. "What do you want to do, baby?" Grace asked. Eli looked around their small apartment and smiled. "I want to keep fighting for families like ours, Mama. There are so many people who need someone to stand up for them." The boy who was once laughed at for being small had become a symbol of courage and justice. 5 years later, Eli Carter stood in the Grand Library of Harvard Law School. He was the youngest student ever accepted. His mother, Grace, ran the Carter Family Legal Center, where poor families could get free help when landlords treated them unfairly. Meanwhile, Conrad Vale's empire was gone forever. Investigators found proof that he had cheated in every one of his buildings. He was sent to prison for 12 years. His properties were turned into cooperatives owned by the tenants. For the first time, families had safe homes they truly owned. The old bad judge, Judge Rowland, was forced to retire and was also investigated for corruption. Eli's case brought big changes across the country. New laws were passed to protect poor tenants. Families who had been separated were brought back together. Mrs. Alvarez's daughter got healthy again and went to medical school. Mr. Daniels's tenants group helped hundreds of families fix their homes. Mrs. Porter celebrated her 80th birthday in a warm, safe apartment. Eli's case became famous. Law schools made his story required reading. Students studied how a young boy had beaten a system full of lies and power. They said it was proof that courage and truth could win, even against corruption. But Eli always said the same thing whenever someone asked how it felt to win. The real victory, he said, was proving that ordinary people have amazing power when they refuse to accept unfairness. The boy who once wore clothes too big for him had found his purpose in life. He learned something that would stay with him forever. Everyone has the power to fight for what's right. Eli showed the world that justice is not about money or connections. It's about truth, courage, and never giving up. Sometimes the smallest voices tell the biggest truths. His story reminds us that we all can be heroes in someone else's life. Each of us can stand up for what's right, protect the weak, and demand fairness. So ask yourself, what unfair thing in your community needs a voice? What wrong needs someone brave enough to stand against it? The next Eli Carter might be reading this story right now. Maybe it's you. The question isn't whether you have power to change the world. It's whether you have the courage to try. Sometimes, ordinary people do extraordinary things simply because they refuse to believe that things can't change. Eli proved that justice is possible for everyone. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more kind and powerful stories. Watch our next video for another unforgettable journey. And share this story with someone who needs it today.